So I came to the last meeting and was astounded by the speaker. It was fantastic. I called Frank and said, I don't even know what to say. And I called some of my high school buddies and said, I don't even know what to say. There's no way I can measure up to that world. And they said, well, pray to the Holy Spirit, something will come to you. So we'll see if something can. So, woman, how does your concern affect me? And this is what Jesus said to Mary when she urged him to perform his first miracle, which is turning water into wine at the wedding at Cana. I had the same reaction to Frank when he asked me to speak today. I said, man, how does your concern affect me? I'm just a ham and egger from Kalamazoo, Michigan. I'm not some super Catholic. Why would anyone want to hear from me? I struggle with my faith. It would be hypocritical for me to get up before this audience and bring something worthy to them and speak here. What do I have to do? What's in it for me? And what do I offer of interest to this audience? And in sales, we always say, what's the with them? What's in it for me, right? And I also ask, what's going to be the unintended consequence of me speaking today? And I ask this last question because I'm always interested in unintended consequences. As a sales executive, I've often been tasked with building out commission programs. I learned early in my career that a minor payout adjustment in a commission plan can have a dramatic impact on the outcome of your annual number. And if you were to ask 100 salespeople simple math questions, like what is a hypotenuse, or explain the Pythagorean theorem to me, or tell me about the quadratic equation, 90% of them would have no idea what foreign language I was speaking. But I can tell you 100% of them can do Einstein-level physics math equations when it comes to optimizing their sales commission. So they know where all the little nooks and crannies are to optimize that commission. So your commission structure needs to be tight. So when you're developing a commission program, the ideal theory is that the plan provides great upside and fair reward and work effort for the salesperson, as well as beneficial results for the company as well. And many times in management, we find ourselves cursed with outcomes that were never expected. In many cases, the expectation of the program fell short due to the craftiness of the salespeople to optimize and find the quickest path to sales without really getting the goals that we were looking for. In other cases, it was too strict, and you ended up finding salespeople that went hungry and quit, or they were fired because they couldn't hit their number. And the law of unintended consequences hits again, right? So today, when I started thinking about this, I started thinking about, well, there's the unintended consequences, but there's the flip side of that, which are unintended blessings. And today, I would like to talk a little bit about some unintended blessings that sent my brother and I on the courses that we ended up going on in our adult life. I'm going to refer back to the first unintended blessing, which comes from that biblical passage of John 2, verse 1 through 12, the wedding at Cana. Christ conducts his first miracle. It's the only time in the Bible I'm aware of where Jesus could be considered as being disrespectful to his mother. As you recall, Mary, upon learning about the wedding party, has run out of wine, asks Jesus to help. He replies, woman, how does your concern affect me? And I was like, why would he respond that way? And I think he knew that as soon as he conducted this first miracle, the hourglass was flipped, the time dial was set, and life would never, ever be the same. He knew what the village conversation would be that next morning. And I imagine it went something like this. Hiram, get up. The sundial says it's almost noon. We have some wheat to separate from the chaff. Why are you so late for work? You know we should have been at work 2 hours ago. What did you do last night? Oh, Joshua, you missed a party. It was a rave. It was a blast. My head hurts. I think I might be a little hungover, or maybe a lot hungover. Dude, it was so much fun. It started off a little quiet, though, but the reception rocked. It was dope. This guy from out of town, maybe Nazareth or someplace, I don't know. I'm not sure, dude, but you had to have been there. Why, Hiram? What happened? Well, the wedding was solid. Bunch of our peeps there, some good-looking girls, too, but we ran out of liquor. It was wine. Not really good wine, but not bad wine. Went dry right after dinner, and the band just started. Some band out west. I think they were the Rolling Stones, maybe Journey, I'm not sure. So anyway, Ezekiel Jr., he sends his servants out to the liquor store, but it was after 7 o'clock, place is closed, couldn't get any booze. So the party looked like it was going to be straight out boring. Anyway, this guy I'm telling you about, his mom, and he kind of get into it. The next thing you know, bam, he turns water into wine. 30 gallons. I was like, what? Not just any wine, but some premium good stuff. Not Boone's Farm or Mad Dog, let me tell you, it was filthy good. We need to go out and find this guy. Jesus knew when you conduct a miracle and give out free wine, word is going to get around. And it soon did. And his path was set, and the path he knew would end up in his crucifixion. The instant that water turned to wine, the sundial on his life was set. The hourglass was split for his life, and it would never be the same. An unintended consequence, perhaps, that Mary was unaware of, eventually leading to his death, but certainly an intended blessing for all of us when 3 days later he rose from the dead and the course of history was changed. So let's fast forward 1,950 years later. In the deep south of the United States, 1948, my maternal grandmother was a newly divorced mother of one child, my mom, named Patsy. By late 40 standards, and certainly by her Southern Baptist upbringing, she was wild. And she was a single mom, willing to do what it took to make it through the post-war economy. At the time, my mom was about 5 years old. She had been shuffled between family members as my grandmother pursued her party at all costs lifestyle. It was about that time that my grandmother went to Oakland Park, which is a horse track in Hot Springs, Arkansas, with a cohort of hers, and she met an older man by the name of Leo. She developed a relationship with Leo that lasted about 10 years. There were two problems. The first is Leo was married, and the second was Leo was considered to be an upstanding Catholic leader in the Archdiocese of St. Louis. My grandmother became what in today's lingo would be Leo's side chick. They carried on an affair for some time, and my grandmother was never apologetic about it. She called Leo her sugar daddy, and although I don't know all the details, I do know that Leo's wife knew about it, and she was deeply hurt by the affair. My grandmother had an interesting perspective about religion. Later in life, she would say how she loved Catholics. She would say, take Leo for instance. He would be with me on Friday, go to confession on Saturday, church on Sunday, and by Wednesday, he's back with me again. Now that's a religion I can get behind. Very late in her life, she did convert to the Catholic faith, and I hope that the expectation was not in her heart when she did, but knowing my grandmother, you just never knew. So Leo, likely out of coercion or blackmail or maybe just pity on my mother, secretly arranged to enroll her in a Catholic school, St. Joseph Catholic School in St. Louis, Missouri. She attended from grades 1 to 7 her formative years, and the Sisters of St. Joseph demonstrated to this little girl the power of prayer, the joy of solitude, the importance of sacrifice. The school was really a respite from her crazy home life, which was not good at all. She learned her love for reading as a form of escape, her love for humanity. She vowed to change her unhealthy, destructive family tradition and that she observed in her mother's behavior. I'm going to get to that later on what she did. The next unintended consequence came 23 years later, when on May 7th, 1971, my brother and I were the direct beneficiaries of a government program. Kalamazoo Board of Education, in a well-intentioned plan to desegregate schools, voted 4-0 to approve busing that would send us 45 minutes across town. We were bus FOBO, first on in the morning, last off in the afternoon. And I was very susceptible to motion sickness. My mom drove me to the local school, which was about a mile away, and I was always getting sick. So a 45-minute bus ride, cleaning up me getting sick after every day to a school that was failing was not in the cards. So the next year, or that year, we were enrolled in St. Monica's Catholic School. My brother Dan in kindergarten, I was in the 2nd grade. And much like my mom, Patsy's experience, St. Monica changed our early development, which led us to our high school, which Frank mentioned was Hackett Catholic Central, which then put a mark on our development, placing a solid foundation for our adult endeavors. I'm going to speak about my brother here. St. Monica and Hackett pulled out the best of our gene pool. He was able to pursue music and the arts, and he had a supernatural talent for playing piano and organ. The safe and inclusive nature of the school led this cherubic-looking young boy to play piano and organ at grade school masses, hockey games, football games, and at the Jesus Christ Superstar, which is an acclaimed, at that time, a very acclaimed play at our school that got national attention. I think Dan would have been ridiculed at any other school, certainly at the school we would have gone to, but not at Hackett and not at St. Monica's. After high school, he graduated with an organ degree and a degree in business from the University of Indiana, which is a spectacular music school, as you might know. And he was the pianist for the Singing Hoosiers while I was there, and traveled across all of North America putting on shows with the Singing Hoosiers. And his talent led him to Rome to play for St. John Paul II, which was pretty amazing to have that bestowed upon you. And in the past 35 years, if you've gone to church anywhere in Atlanta, you may have come across him. He's been playing at various churches in Atlanta for 35 years. Thousands and thousands of Atlanta area parishioners have been consoled at his funerals, overjoyed at weddings, blessed to receive their first Eucharist, and led into and out of Mass by Dan and his well-directed orchestra. He's just really, really good. Quite frankly, I've always been envious of his talent. He's just fantastic. And if it had not been for the Kalamazoo's Board of Education on busing, I don't think Dan would have had the time, the support, or the opportunity to deliver on this gift from God. The last unintended blessing I'd like to talk to you a little bit about today has to do with my work with nonprofits. As Frank mentioned, I worked for Black Flag from 2010 to about 2 years ago, so about 12 years. I had two roles. Starting my first role, I was Director of Strategic Account. And I don't know how many of you know about Black Flag, but basically they provide software only to nonprofits, as does my current company, Be Generous. The software assists nonprofits in things like raising more money, marketing to potential new donors, keeping track of accounting, processing payments, and delivering on their mission. And Frank mentioned in my introduction that I came to Be Generous, but before that, I was the Group Vice President of Faith Communities team at Black Flag. That team had about 80 people focused on organizations of faith. Prior to that, I was Director of Strategic Accounts, which led small teams across all nonprofit verticals. So we had verticals such as Cause and Cure, healthcare, higher education, animal welfare, K-12 schools, and the like. Wherever there was a hot spot, they would deploy myself and this team to go sell our products and our larger products. Unintended blessing I'd like to speak about here happened while I was in that role, the Director of Strategic Accounts role. My early impact in that role was good. It was pretty dramatic, and we were running a series of pursuits that we were expected to lose. And much of it was due to the strategies that I had brought from my previous career and learned in other places. About 4 months after I joined the company, I was faced with a moral dilemma. As you might know, not all nonprofits can be considered benevolent, and not all align with my moral compass. My family was settling into Charleston. My kids were at Bishop England and Christ the King. We were finding new friends, and we really loved it. We were just settling into our neighborhood, and everyone who comes to Charleston loves it. We didn't want to leave. But at work, I was tasked with leading a sales engagement to a highly recognized anti-life organization. You would know them like that if I said them. Organization responsible for millions and millions of aborted pregnancies. My stomach churned. I was repulsed by the idea, and I considered quitting. I drove to one of our local Catholic churches here, and I spoke to a priest about it, and unfortunately he gave me very vanilla advice. And I walked away. I couldn't sleep. I knew if I had led this successful effort, this organization would have more money to deliver on their mission, which I just could not morally reconcile. So I decided to push my luck, and I went to my boss, and I was going to tell him I was not going to be involved in the sales pursuit. So the next day, I practiced my pitch several times on the way to work in the car, and I went to my boss and I broke it down. I said, I cannot be involved in this pursuit. Their mission is abhorrent to me. I love my job, and I really want to stay. However, I'm willing to lose it if you insist I remain on the sales engagement. He sat quiet for a long time, what seemed like a long time, thinking about what to say. He said to me, in the 12 years I've been here, no one has ever said that they were not going to serve or refuse to work with a client. And I said, well, there's a first time for everything, and today's the first time. And much to my relief, he said, if you feel that strongly about it, don't call on it. We'll work something else out. However, don't tell anyone you've had this conversation. So I kept the conversation quiet, but somehow it ended up leaking out. And I was worried it might have a negative impact on my career. The unintended blessing came years later. Sometimes God doesn't work on your time, as you often hear. And I was tasked with building a new team, a new faith communities team that was focused on organization of faith, ministries and missions and churches and synagogues and the like. It was a highly visible and strategic effort that Blackbaud was putting in place. We had a lot of press on it and a lot of investment. We invested about $40 million into this effort. I started the internal interview process to find some people to come onto my team, and all of a sudden, the cream of the crop, the best of the best salespeople showed up at my door. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, I was going to call you, and here you are. You're here talking to me about being on my job. Most of them had strong Christian or Jewish beliefs. Many had heard rumor of my defiant stance in my early career, and we developed a heck of a team, the strongest team that I've ever been on. We were edged out of number one out of about 80 teams. We were edged out about number one in 2018. We won the top spot in 2019. If it had not been for the pandemic, I think we would have won year after year after year. It was just a great, solid team. We were a well-tuned machine. We trusted each other. We had each other's backs. We made a living by selling to ministries and missions and dioceses and churches. Most of all, we were virtuous. Our customers were good-hearted. They were easy to work with, and they were very professional when they negotiated. And we made it a point to reciprocate. It was a good run and a highlight of my career, and I hated to see it go out during the pandemic. After I left Blackbaud, several of them followed me to be generous, which is just great to have them at my team today. Now, I said earlier I was going to come back to my mother, Patsy. So when she died, the Kalamazoo Gazette did a half-page story in her life. The story, headline, former area philanthropist succumbs to cancer. You see, my mom died at 47 years old, and she did. She changed her life. She worked tirelessly for the downtrodden and the most vulnerable. She looped my brother and I into her efforts. We were often resourced to read to the blind, assist the deaf, deliver warm clothes to the migrants. And the migrants worked the fruit belts of Michigan late into the fall, so they didn't have a lot of warm clothes. They were coming up from Mexico, coming up through Michigan, and harvesting grapes and apples in September, and the nights were really cold and they needed warm clothes. So in one case, I had to do all three at once. About 14 years old, I was deployed to Gene the Pumpkin Man's farm to harvest. Now, I don't know if anybody's from that neck of the woods, but you'd know who Gene is if you've been in Western Michigan, because you see his house. You can't help but see his house when you come in off M43. Gene was legally deaf. He owned a huge farm west of town. Everything is painted orange. Orange tractors, orange trucks, orange cars, orange outbuildings, orange barns. Everything is orange. His house even had orange. It was white, but it had orange trim all around it. And he wore orange overalls. I don't know where he got them back then, but everything was orange. He employed a few migrant workers from Mexico, but many of his workers came from the blind rehab, from the Michigan Blind Rehab Center in Kalamazoo, which handled a lot of people who came in, were blind later in life. We usually weren't born blind, were blinded later in life, and then had to figure out what to do with their life with this new disability that they had. Their task at Gene's farm was to harvest the thousands of pumpkins and squash, and I was volunteered to manage this crazy communication between the deaf and the blind. And as the tractors are going and people are picking, and it was just crazy. It was really something to behold. And when it came to work effort, Gene's farm was a well-oiled machine. And I learned a lot about work ethic, and I learned a lot about the capabilities of what many people believe were broken or disabled people. And that is the outcome that my mom was looking for. That was an unintended blessing. Many of you might know Kalamazoo is a college town. They've got 4 or 5 colleges there. Western Michigan University was in our hometown. We often came home from high school to find homesick foreign exchange students sitting at our table. Many of them came from countries that were hostile to the US, Syria, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Bangladesh, and Iran. Most were Muslim. My mom introduced them to the Easter and Thanksgiving, Christmas, and the American way of life through Memorial Day and the 4th of July. We always had a couple of students at every celebration, family celebration, and it was inconvenient, especially difficult when you're in high school, the Iranian hostage crisis is going on, and you've got a couple of Iranian kids sitting at your table coming over on the weekends. But we learned a lot, and we learned that people were people, mostly good, no matter where they came from. And that was the outcome my mom was looking for, right? Another unintended blessing. She delivered meals, she worked food pantries, volunteered at schools, assisted the poor, and after moving to Georgia in '88 with my dad, and up until her death in 1991, was a force of revenue for St. Vincent de Paul Society in Atlanta. She convinced some very high-end retail organizations and fashion outlets to give her the return goods, and they showed up at St. Vincent de Paul thrift store. And if you ever, during that time, were gone to the St. Vincent de Paul thrift store, it looked like a Macy's for about 3 years. Her impact went on and on and on, and it touched thousands of people. I wish I could condense her efforts into one simple sentence or one simple group, but she delivered on volunteer efforts and funding for so many people. And without the Sisters of St. Joseph's and St. Joseph's School, I don't think any of it would have happened. And that's the outcome of Sisters of Rome. Before I make my final comments, I'd like to personally thank Frank for this unintended blessing. My brain was right when I rebelled against his request to do this, but my soul was not so sure. Frank's request forced me to re-examine my life, who I am, how I can be a better brother, a better son, a dad, husband, a leader, and a Catholic. The week after Frank asked me to speak, I went to confession. And it was the first time in a long time. Reconciliation, I guess, is probably the right word, right? And the first time in a long time. And the priest asked me, he said, "What brings you here today?" Which I've never heard that when I've gone to confession. What brings you here today? And I told him I needed to get right. I was speaking to an audience of Catholic leaders, and I'm not worthy to do so. And he laughed, and he laughed in the confessional, and kept laughing, and he said, "None of us are worthy." So it's good to go to confession. It's always good, and Frank's unintended blessing reminded me of that. If you'll permit me, I'd like to leave you with a couple thoughts about nonprofits and the nonprofit marketplace. Number one, not all nonprofits are virtuous. Many have missions that assist evil. And we've been talking about my alma mater, Michigan State, which I love Michigan State. I love going there. It was a great time. But some of these colleges and universities or some of these nonprofits don't know that what they're doing assists evil. And my alma mater is a great example. It's a state college that goes beyond the pale to virtue signal their secular position. Earlier this year, you might have seen it on the news, they released their annual language guide for communications to the residents, faculty, and staff. The guide warns against problematic words that should be avoided as they could be deemed offensive. These words include Christmas tree, Easter bunny, wreaths, gifts, Easter eggs in America, among a lot of other words. So why would I, or should I, continue to give them money? MSU's latest recruitment tag says Spartans will, but when it comes to giving money, this Spartan won't. So my request of you is to really research and consider where your donations go. Number two, our brothers and sisters in the evangelical Protestant world really understand, leverage, and make the most out of technology to engage their congregants, and it really works. Many are wary of the internet, artificial intelligence, big tech, and they're concerned about, and they're making technology moves right now to insulate themselves against cancel culture and technological blackmail or cancellation. And when I say that, I'll talk off the record about Billy Graham Christian Ministries. We had Billy Graham Christian Ministries come to us and they said, "Who hosts your software?" Hosting means where does the software reside and the servers that drive it. And we said, Microsoft. And they said, "Well, we can't do business with you." We said, "Well, why?" They said, "Well, Microsoft, there's nothing wrong with Microsoft. We like Microsoft. But someday we're going to have a stance on marriage, or we're going to have a stance on something that they're not gonna like, and they could throw us out and cancel our contract. So we are gonna build our own server farm, which is insane. It takes an insane amount of money. It's just a crazy idea, but it's the right idea for that organization. And if you ever are interested in learning more about some of the the cancel culture type situations that are coming on with technology, you don't have to go too far to hear about what's going on in that secular world when they don't like what you're doing. Organizations like Focus on the Family are now on the Southern Poverty Hate List because they can't, because of their stance on marriage. Well, my company's got a current agreement with the bank lender that we use that we will never call on anyone from that's on the Southern Poverty Hate List. So they're canceled, right? Not because of anything I want to do, but because of what's happening in the secular world. So it's really important, I think, that as Catholics we think about where this technology is going and how to best leverage it and insulate ourselves from these type of potential cancellations. And the third thing I would like to say is strongly consider giving your time, talent, and treasure to Catholic schools. The pandemic gave a lot of Catholic schools a lifeline in the United States. I visited a lot of them. We are seeing this huge situation in especially the big cities, New York, Boston, LA, where the traditional European Catholics who came and built these schools and drove these schools for generations have left, and they're being replaced by Eastern religions that have really no interest in Catholic schools. And so a lot of Catholic schools are closing, and they're consolidating, and they're renting them out, these schools, to places that aren't Catholic for their religious education. So it's important that we continue to have that. Just off script real quick, there's an organization called CARA out of Georgetown. They did a study about 5 or 6 years ago looking at millennials and church attendance. And they found that if a student goes through a Catholic high school, 12 years of a Catholic high school, the likelihood of us attending weekly mass is about 40% when he's a millennial or she. If they go through 8th grade, it's about 30%. And if they go through a public school, it's about 3%. So, for the future of our faith, it's very important that young people be exposed to our faith and grow up in it, or they're just not going to show up in Mass. The other thing that's happening right now is the economically challenged Latino population that's coming into the United States southern border and other areas. Don't look as Catholic schools as a potential opportunity for them. Most of the countries they come from, Catholic education is reserved for the ultra wealthy or the ultra connected. So they don't know that there's potential for scholarships or other things. So from a time perspective, I would suggest go watch a play, a sporting event, attend a Booster Club event. Go do something. These kids love an audience and they need an audience. And we're blessed to have great gems like Bishop England and the feeder schools here in Charleston. And we can go do that. They have great arts, and Bishop England was just named, I think 2 or 3 years ago, as the most successful sports school in South Carolina history. And if you look at the other schools that are next to them in other states, it's an impressive list, and you'd know a lot of them, like Birmingham, Brother Rice, etc. Volunteers, certainly, they can use all the help in the world. And then lastly, when it comes to treasure, I implore you to think about giving unselfishly to a Catholic school that you've never heard of. One in Newark, or Detroit, or San Francisco, or Walla Walla, Washington, someplace that has no impact on your life. They're easily found on the internet. You can look them up and easily donate online. And I can tell you this, and trust me when I tell you this, that there's definitely a patsy out there looking for the loophole.